We're back talking about the fallout from the Supreme Court's Hobby Lobby decision. Joining me now, Nancy Northup, President and CEO of the Center for Reproductive Rights, and Jess McIntosh, Communications Director for Emily's List, a PAC that supports pro-choice Democratic women running for Congress and governor. Nancy, let me ask you, what do you think about this idea of making more birth control available over the counter?
Well, I think it would be a good idea for the FDA to look to see if it can be safe and effective for use by all women over the counter. It's true most places around the world that you can get birth control pills over the counter.
Really?
The Center for Reproductive Rights fought for a decade to make sure that emergency contraception was over the counter. So I do think it's time for the FDA to look at this issue.
That, of course, just won't solve the problem created by the Hobby Lobby case. But I am curious to see whether that's something you can see conservatives, Republicans getting behind, because they are offended at the suggestion that really what this is about is birth control, and this seems to me like a good test case of that.
Well, Nancy's right. They did fight to get emergency contraception available over the counter, and Republicans fought them every step of the way.
Right.
I mean, the Hobby Lobby ruling didn't happen in a vacuum. The reason why Republicans feel the need to push back on this and try to say that this isn't about birth control and this isn't about them disliking women having quote-unquote consequence-free sex is because this ruling came as the last in a very long line of attempts by every branch of government that they get access to try to limit our access to affordable birth control. This wasn't out of nowhere. The Blunt Amendment from a couple of years back did exactly what the Hobby Lobby ruling did. It said that your employer could decide not to cover your birth control if he didn't like the reasons you were taking it. That ultimately didn't go anywhere because we still have the White House, but Republicans have been trying to do this for a while. So I think all of a sudden trying to back their way out of it and support something else, I mean, sure, I'd love to have that conversation, but forgive me for being really, really skeptical.
Right. And when it comes down to the four kinds of birth control that are at issue in Conestoga Wood and Hobby Lobby, they include emergency contraception, two different kinds of IUDs, right? Two oral emergency contraception. Now, the argument that folks have been saying is, well, they only objected to those four, right? They didn't object to the other ones. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, those four are contraception, and it's really important as people are listening to this to understand that. You know, a pregnancy is established when a pre-embryo is established in the uterus, right? And I always say to people, you know, when you're using IVF and you have fertilized eggs in a petri dish, you know you're not pregnant. And when those are implanted in your uterus, you also know you're not pregnant. You're waiting and hoping for that moment.
Become pregnant.
Yes, for the implantation, and then you're pregnant. So this notion that somehow you're pregnant before that is not true. And so
and that notion, just for the context, that notion that you are pregnant before that, and that these drugs then disrupt that, and therefore are actually abortion, which is the contention of Hobby Lobby, a factual claim which was waved away by Alito saying, well, it doesn't matter if they're right or not, it's their sincerely held belief.
Right, well, and it's completely scientifically, medically false, just like saying, you know, embryos in a petri dish, you're not pregnant. So it's important to not be kind of fooled by that part of the argument. But more importantly, the rationale of the case, which is that any kind of unscientific belief can lead to rejecting. Can lead to rejecting a form of health care. There's no limit on that.
Do you, Emily? Do you see this case playing in races across the country? There was a little bit of interesting news on it in Colorado yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that women are definitely paying attention to this. I think that we started talking a little bit about the slippery slope of the not having basis in science. The thing that concerns me about the slippery slope argument is that it suggests that something bad might happen because of this ruling.
Right.
When, in fact, something bad has happened. Birth control is very, very important to women. More than 95% of women have taken birth control, and that includes, you cannot reach those numbers with just Democrats or just single women or just women who don't have a religious affiliation. That includes all of the women. So that is why we are seeing this be so resonant in races across the country, in conversations across the country, and I think that it's going to be a real motivating factor. We have seen the gender gap between Republicans and Democrats grow exponentially, as birth control became
Yes.
part of the debate again. We saw historic gender gaps in 2012. I'm sure that had a lot to do with Foster Freeze's putting aspirin between your knees for the gals as advice, and
Right.
Todd Aiken and all of that. If they're going to continue down this path, I think we're just going to see it grow even more. So yeah, definitely resonant.
Well, Jess, and your point about the sort of importance of birth control, its kind of primacy, was fascinating to look at the majority opinion yesterday and the dissent by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Of course, it's 5 male justices on the majority side, all the women justices in dissent. In which Alito, it's a religious freedom case, it's a case about RFRA, and for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she starts with a long explanation of why this was part of the legislation to begin with. How important birth control is, how expensive it can be, why Congress saw fit to put it in there, and it was exactly the way the case has been covered from the left and right all the way through, which is the right saying this is about religious freedom and the left largely saying this is about birth control.
They were so careful to say that it was just going to affect birth control. They made sure that it wouldn't affect vaccines. So somehow your religious opposition to my birth control is more valid than your religious opposition to vaccinations, even though neither has any basis in science. I find that almost more offensive.
Nancy.
And it gets back to why it's so important that we understand that contraception is part of preventative health care. And that's where you have, Ruth Bader Ginsburg coming from. Women, on average, are going to spend 5 years trying to get pregnant, being pregnant, nursing a young infant. They're going to spend 30 years trying not to get pregnant. And that is protecting their health and their lives and their futures and their families and planning for that. So women get that.
Right. And that was put front and center by the Ginsburg dissent. Nancy Northrop from the Center for Reproductive Rights and Jess McIntosh, not Emily, from Emily's List. Thank you. That is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Chris. Thanks, Brett.